The living room was quiet except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the soft whimpers of Max, a beautiful 12-year-old golden retriever. His owner sat on the floor beside him, gently running her fingers through his thick golden fur. She had spent the last hour just watching him, her heart growing heavier with each passing minute. Max wasn't just any dog. For 12 wonderful years, he had been her closest companion, her comfort through hard times, and her reason to smile even on the darkest days. She still remembered the day she brought him home, a tiny ball of energy that turned her life upside down in the most beautiful way possible. But now things were different. The once energetic dog, who used to race through the park chasing squirrels, could barely stand up without struggling. His morning walks, which used to be the highlight of both their days, had become shorter and shorter. These days, he would take a few steps and then look up at her with those big brown eyes, as if asking for permission to stop. The change hadn't happened overnight. It started with small things, a slight limp here, a missed meal there. At first, she thought it was just age catching up with him. After all, 12 years was getting up there for a large dog. But when Max stopped eating his favorite treats and couldn't even get excited about car rides anymore, she knew something was seriously wrong. The past 3 months had been a blur of vet visits. She had driven to every animal clinic in the city, hoping someone could help her best friend. The bills piled up on her kitchen counter, but she didn't care. She would have spent every penny she had if it meant helping Max. Each veterinarian had a different theory, ran different tests, but none could seem to pinpoint exactly what was wrong. Some suggested it might be arthritis, others suspected nerve problems, and a few mentioned the possibility of something more serious. Today had been particularly hard. Max hadn't touched his breakfast, and getting him to take his pain medication was a struggle. She had to watch him try 3 times before he could stand up from his bed, his legs trembling with the effort. The sight of him stumbling while trying to reach his water bowl was what finally broke her. She couldn't bear to see him suffering like this anymore. After hours of crying and second-guessing herself, she had made the call to Dr. Ray's clinic. The receptionist's voice was kind and understanding as she scheduled the appointment for tomorrow morning. "Just give him lots of love tonight," she had said softly before hanging up. Those words echoed in her head now as she sat beside Max, memorizing every detail of his face. She looked at the clock. It was almost dinner time. Usually, the sound of his food bowl would bring Max running, even on his bad days. But now he just lay there, his head resting on his paws, those expressive eyes following her every move. The thought that this would be their last evening together made her chest tight with grief. Her phone buzzed with messages from family and close friends. They all knew what tomorrow meant. Some offered to come over, to be with her during these final hours, but she had politely declined. She wanted this last night to be just the two of them, just like it had been for so many years. As the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the living room floor, she couldn't help but wonder if she was doing the right thing. Was she giving up too soon? Had she tried everything possible? The doubt gnawed at her, but then Max let out another painful whimper as he tried to shift position, and she was reminded why she had made this impossible choice. The appointment was set for 9 a.m. tomorrow. In less than 15 hours, she would have to say goodbye to her best friend. But tonight, she decided, wouldn't be about sadness. Tonight would be about celebrating the incredible joy Max had brought to her life. She would make his favorite dinner, break all the usual rules, and make sure he knew just how much he was loved. The kitchen came alive with the smell of chicken and rice, Max's favorite meal since he was a puppy. Even though he hadn't shown much interest in food lately, she wanted this last dinner to be special. The familiar sound of chicken sizzling in the pan stirred something in the old dog. For the first time in days, he lifted his head with interest, his nose twitching at the familiar aroma. She couldn't help but smile through her tears as she cooked, remembering all the times he had sat in this exact spot, hoping for a piece of chicken to accidentally fall to the floor. Back then, she had always pretended not to notice his clever begging strategy. Tonight, though, there would be no need for pretense. Tonight, all the rules were meant to be broken. As she stirred the rice, memories flooded back. The time Max had somehow managed to steal an entire roast chicken from the counter when he was 2 years old. She had come back from answering the phone to find him looking incredibly guilty, with only a few scraps of meat left as evidence. She should have been angry, but instead, they both ended up having sandwiches for dinner, and she couldn't stop laughing at his satisfied expression. When the meal was ready, she placed his portion in his special bowl, the blue ceramic one with little bones painted around the rim. It was a gift from her mother years ago, who had always treated Max like her own grandchild. Instead of putting it in his usual corner, she set it next to her own plate at the dining table. Max watched her with curious eyes, his tail giving a slight wag as she patted the cushion she had placed on the chair next to hers. With gentle hands, she helped him onto the chair. It took some effort. He was still a big dog, despite having lost weight recently. But soon they were sitting side by side, sharing what she knew would be their final meal together. She took pictures with her phone, trying to capture every moment, the way his ears perked up at the first bite, how his tail slowly began to wag with more enthusiasm, the gentle way he took each piece of chicken from her hand. After dinner, she broke another rule. The couch had always been off limits, a rule she had stuck to firmly despite Max's pleading looks over the years. But tonight, she helped him up onto the soft cushions, and together they watched his favorite nature shows. She had always suspected he enjoyed them, the way he would perk up at the sight of other animals on screen. Tonight confirmed it, as he watched with genuine interest, occasionally making soft woofs at the dogs that appeared. As the evening wore on, she pulled out the old photo albums. Each page held another memory. Max as a tiny puppy on his first day home, swimming in the lake during their summer trips, wearing that silly reindeer headband at Christmas that he somehow never tried to shake off. There he was at every birthday, every holiday, every significant moment of the past 12 years. Her loyal friend, always by her side, always ready with a wagging tail or a comforting paw. When bedtime came, she didn't even pretend to send him to his bed in the corner. Instead, she helped him up onto her bed, something she had only allowed a handful of times during thunderstorms. He settled into the spot he had always seemed to know was his, right next to her pillow. She lay down beside him, one hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The night seemed to pass both too quickly and too slowly. She dozed off occasionally but kept waking up, wanting to savor every moment. Max slept more peacefully than he had in weeks, perhaps sensing that tonight was different. She took more pictures, recorded videos of his gentle snoring, and wrote down every detail she could think of in her phone's notes app. The way his paw twitched when he dreamed, the specific spot behind his ear that still made his leg kick, the unique pattern of gray hairs around his muzzle. As the night deepened, she whispered stories to him, recounting their best adventures together. The time they got lost on a hiking trail, and he somehow led them back to the car. The day he helped her meet her next-door neighbor by tangling their leashes at the dog park. All the times he had somehow known she was sad and hadn't left her side until she felt better. She fought against sleep, not wanting to waste a single minute of their remaining time together. But sometime in the early hours of the morning, with Max's warm body pressed against her side and his steady breathing like a lullaby, she drifted off. Her last conscious thought was a prayer that tomorrow might somehow bring a miracle. Morning arrived with a gentleness that felt almost cruel. The first rays of sunlight crept through the bedroom window, painting warm stripes across the bed where man's best friend still lay peacefully sleeping. For a moment, everything felt normal, just another day beginning. But the weight in her chest quickly reminded her that this morning was different from all others. The alarm on her phone buzzed at 7:30 a.m. She had set it early to give them plenty of time to get ready. Max lifted his head at the sound, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes looked clearer, more alert. It was as if he had drawn strength from their special night together. She reached out to scratch behind his ears, trying to memorize the exact feeling of his soft fur beneath her fingers. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. Max responded with a gentle tail wag, thumping against the mattress in that familiar rhythm she had woken up to countless times before. The sound made her heart ache even more. Getting ready felt surreal. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot, trying not to think about what lay ahead. Max watched her from the bed, his head resting on his paws, following her every movement with those soulful brown eyes. She had planned to make him breakfast, but the thought of food made her own stomach turn, and Max showed no interest in eating either. At 8:15, she helped Max down from the bed. It took longer than usual, whether because of his condition or because she was moving more slowly, she wasn't sure. His paws clicked against the hardwood floors as they made their way to the front door, a sound that had become part of her home's heartbeat over the years. The car ride preparations, usually so routine, now felt monumental. She had spread his favorite blanket across the back seat, the soft blue one with little paw prints that her aunt had given him last Christmas. Max needed more help than usual getting into the car, but he didn't complain. He never did. Even now, when every movement seemed to cause him discomfort, he trusted her completely. The drive to the vet's office usually took 20 minutes, but today she took the long route through the park where they used to walk every morning. The trees were just starting to show their spring buds, and the morning light filtered through the branches in a way that made everything look softer, gentler. Max pressed his nose against the window, something flickering in his eyes as they passed his favorite spots, the big oak tree where he used to chase squirrels, the pond where he had learned to swim, the bench where they would rest and watch the world go by. At each red light, she found herself questioning everything. Was this really the right decision? Max seemed more alert today. Was that a sign? Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as doubts crashed over her like waves. Then Max would whimper softly as he shifted position in the back seat, and she would remember all the nights she had watched him struggle to find a comfortable way to lie down, all the meals he had refused, all the pain she had seen in his eyes. They passed the coffee shop where the owner always kept dog treats behind the counter for their regular morning visits. The local fire station where the firefighters would wave and sometimes let Max visit if they weren't busy. The corner store where he had once stolen a hot dog from a startled tourist's hand. She had paid for it twice over, but the tourist had ended up laughing and taking pictures with Max instead of being angry. Each familiar landmark held a memory, and she found herself talking out loud, reminiscing about their adventures together. Max listened from the back seat, occasionally responding with a soft woof or a tail wag when she mentioned something that seemed to spark a particular memory. His responses made her smile through her tears. Even now, he was trying to make her feel better. As they got closer to the vet's office, traffic slowed to a crawl. A delivery truck had broken down, causing a minor jam. Any other day, this would have been frustrating. Today, she was almost grateful for the delay, for these extra precious minutes with her beloved companion. She reached back to scratch Max's ear, and he leaned into her touch, just as he had done thousands of times before. Finally, they turned into the familiar parking lot of the veterinary clinic. The sign above the door, usually so routine and medical, now seemed to loom over them with an oppressive weight. She found a spot in the far corner of the lot, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment, listening to Max's steady breathing from the back seat. The clock on the dashboard read 8:47 a.m. They were early, but she couldn't bring herself to drive around anymore. Every journey, no matter how long or winding, eventually comes to an end. The veterinary clinic's waiting room felt different this morning. The familiar space, with its mint green walls and educational posters about heartworm prevention and dental care, seemed somehow colder, more clinical. The usual sounds, the gentle bubbling of the fish tank, the soft classical music playing overhead, the occasional meow from the cat boarding area, all felt muted, as if playing from a great distance. Helping Max out of the car had been a challenge. His legs were particularly shaky this morning, though whether from pain or sensing her own anxiety she couldn't tell. Together, they made their way through the parking lot at Max's pace, stopping whenever he needed to rest. The journey of 30 feet from car to clinic door felt like miles. The receptionist looked up as they entered, recognition and understanding softening her features. She had known Max since he was a puppy, had seen him bounce through these doors countless times over the years. Now she watched as he slowly made his way to his favorite spot near the reception desk, the same place where he used to sit eagerly waiting for his treats after checkups. "The forms are ready," the receptionist said quietly, sliding a clipboard across the counter. Her voice was gentle, careful, like she was handling something fragile. Perhaps she was. The human heart can feel so breakable at times like these. The paperwork felt surreal. Simple questions required impossible answers. Date of birth. She remembered bringing him home 12 years ago, a tiny ball of golden fluff that fit in her lap. Current medications. The growing collection of pills and supplements that had taken over a kitchen drawer, each promising relief, but delivering less and less as time went on. Reason for visit. How could she possibly summarize 12 years of love and the weight of this decision in a few words on a form? Her hands trembled as she tried to write, the pen leaving shaky lines across the paper. Max sat beside her chair, his gray muzzle resting on her knee like he had done so many times before. His presence, warm and solid against her leg, both comforted and broke her heart. Every few minutes, she would pause in her writing to run her fingers through his fur, to scratch that special spot behind his ears that still made his tail thump weakly against the floor. The waiting room wasn't empty. A young couple sat across from them with a cat carrier, while an elderly man waited with his poodle mix near the window. They all seemed to sense what was happening. The usual chatter of pet owners comparing notes about their furry family members was absent. Instead, there was a respectful quiet, broken only by the sound of Max's occasional deep sighs and the scratch of her pen against paper. She noticed the elderly man watching them, his eyes kind behind his glasses. When their eyes met, he gave a small, understanding nod. His own dog leaned against his legs, gray around the muzzle just like Max. There was a moment of silent communication between them, the kind that can only exist between people who truly understand the depth of love possible between humans and their animal companions. The young couple with the cat carrier were trying not to stare, but she caught them wiping away tears. Their cat meowed softly from within the carrier, and Max lifted his head slightly at the sound, ever the gentle soul, still interested in other animals even now. This small gesture, this tiny piece of his personality shining through despite everything, made fresh tears well up in her eyes. Time seemed to move strangely in that waiting room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward, but each minute felt both endless and too short. She found herself studying every detail of Max's face, committing it all to memory. The specific pattern of white hairs that had appeared around his eyes in recent years, the small scar above his nose from an enthusiastic encounter with a rosebush, the way his eyebrows moved expressively as he watched the activity around him. The forms asked for her signature in multiple places. Each time she signed, her hand hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. Each signature felt like another step toward the inevitable, another small goodbye. Max seemed to sense her distress, pressing his head more firmly against her leg. Even now, he was trying to comfort her. Even now, he was being the faithful friend he had always been. The receptionist's phone rang, making everyone in the waiting room jump slightly. The sound seemed too loud, too harsh for the quiet bubble of grief they had all been sharing. She heard phrases like emergency surgery and schedule adjustment drift across the desk. Her heart began to race. Would they have to reschedule? Could she go through another day of this? But then the receptionist hung up and gave her a gentle smile, indicating everything was still on schedule. As she finished the last form, she noticed something strange. Max had lifted his head, his ears perking up slightly as he looked toward the examination room doors. There was an alertness in his eyes that she hadn't seen in weeks, a spark of the old Max shining through. For a moment, just a brief moment, doubt crept back in. But before she could follow that thought, the door opened and a vet technician called their names. The examination room felt smaller than she remembered. Maybe it was the weight of the moment that made the walls seem to close in, or perhaps it was just that everything felt more intense today. The familiar smell of antiseptic, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the cold metal of the examination table, every detail seemed sharper, more significant. The vet technician, a kind-faced woman with gentle hands, helped lift Max onto the examination table. He was too heavy for one person now, even though he had lost so much weight in recent months. The technician spread a soft blue blanket across the metal surface, making it more comfortable for him. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. "He's such a good boy," the technician said softly, scratching behind Max's ears. "I remember when he used to bound in here, trying to steal treats from my pocket." She smiled at the memory, and for a moment, the heaviness in the room lifted slightly. Max's tail gave a gentle wag at her touch, and he leaned into her hand, always the gentleman, always grateful for any affection offered. The technical details were explained gently, but the vet entered the room with his familiar calm presence, the same doctor who had treated Max since he was a puppy. His eyes went immediately to Max, studying the dog's posture and alertness with professional interest. Something in his expression made her heart skip a beat, not sadness or sympathy, but curiosity. How long has he been this alert? The vet asked, setting down his clipboard. His voice carried a note she hadn't heard before, something that made her pay close attention. Max's tail wagged at the sight of him, stronger than it had in weeks. Just today, she answered, her hand still buried in Max's fur. Since this morning, actually. I thought maybe it was just one of those good days, you know. A final burst of energy. Her voice trailed off as she watched the vet begin his examination. The doctor's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Max's eyes, ears, and gums. He felt along Max's spine, watched his responses, observed his reflexes. With each passing moment, his brow furrowed more deeply, not in concern but in deep thought. The blood work we did last week, he said, reaching for his tablet. I want to look at something. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, pulling up charts and numbers she couldn't understand. Max stood surprisingly steady on the examination table, watching the vet with bright eyes. The silence in the room grew heavy with anticipation. The vet pulled out his stethoscope, listening to Max's heart from different angles. Then he did something unexpected. He took out a treat from his pocket. Max's nose twitched, and his ears perked up immediately. This is a mistake, the vet said firmly, straightening up and putting his stethoscope around his neck. We're not doing this today. His words hung in the air for a moment as she tried to process what he was saying. I don't understand, she whispered, her arms still protectively around Max. Her mind struggled to shift gears, to move from grief to confusion. His condition, the pain he's been in. The vet pulled up a chair, his expression both serious and hopeful. Look at these blood results, he said, turning the tablet so she could see. I missed something last week, we all did. These numbers here, he pointed to a series of figures, they indicate something different than what we thought. He explained in simple terms how Max's symptoms, the lethargy, the loss of appetite, the apparent pain, weren't signs of an untreatable condition. Instead, they pointed to a severe vitamin D deficiency combined with a treatable thyroid problem. The combination had created a perfect storm of symptoms that had mimicked something far more serious. But all the other vets, she started, hope and disbelief warring in her voice. Max leaned against her, his body warm and suddenly seeming stronger than it had in months. Sometimes we get so focused on looking for horses, we miss the zebras, the vet said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The combination of issues is unusual, which is why it was overlooked. But the treatment is relatively simple. He stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulling out several small bottles. We'll start him on vitamin D supplements right away, along with thyroid medication. The improvement you're seeing today? That's likely because his body is finally starting to respond to the small changes in diet you made last week. Tears were flowing freely down her face now, but they were different tears than before. Max seemed to sense the change in mood, his tail wagging with more enthusiasm, his eyes bright and interested in the treats the vet still held. So he's not. She couldn't finish the sentence, still afraid to believe it might be true. No, the vet said firmly. He's not ready to leave us yet, not by a long shot. In fact, with proper treatment, he should be back to his old self within a few weeks. He paused, scratching Max behind the ears. Though I suspect you'll see improvement even sooner, given how he's responding already. The room that had felt so heavy with sorrow just minutes ago now seemed to buzz with newfound energy. The vet tech who had helped them earlier peeked in, sensing the change in atmosphere. Her face broke into a wide smile when she saw Max happily accepting treats from the doctor. I need to write you some prescriptions, the vet said, reaching for his prescription pad. And we'll need to schedule a follow-up appointment for next week. But first, he handed her a treat. I think someone deserves a celebration. Max took the treat from her hand with more enthusiasm than she'd seen in months, his tail wagging steadily now. His eyes, which had been so dull and pained just days ago, sparkled with their old light. It wasn't just her imagination or wishful thinking. He really was coming back to her. The transformation over the next few months seemed nothing short of miraculous, though the vet assured her it was simply good medicine at work. The first week was filled with small victories that felt enormous. Max finishing his entire bowl of food, climbing the front steps without help, wagging his tail with his old enthusiasm when the neighbor's kids walked by. She kept a diary of his recovery, documenting every little improvement. Day 3. Max brought his tennis ball to her for the first time in months. Day 7, he barked at the mailman, something she never thought she'd be happy to hear again. Day 10, he managed a full walk around the block, slow but steady, his tail held high the whole way. The vitamin D supplements and thyroid medication became part of their morning routine. At first, she had to hide them in cheese or peanut butter, but soon Max was taking them eagerly, as if he too understood these little pills were bringing him back to life. His appetite returned with a vengeance. She found herself having to move the treat jar to a higher shelf after catching him attempting to knock it down one afternoon. Other people noticed the change too. The elderly man with the poodle mix from that fateful day at the vet's office spotted them during a walk one morning. His eyes welled up with happy tears as Max trotted over to greet him, nothing like the struggling dog he had seen in the waiting room. "It's like seeing a ghost transform back into a dog," he said, watching Max playfully sniff his own dog. The local coffee shop owner couldn't believe her eyes when they resumed their morning visits. "Look who's back," she exclaimed, rushing out from behind the counter with Max's favorite treats. He sat perfectly, just like old times, waiting patiently for his reward. His manners, it seemed, had never left him, just been buried beneath the illness. Week by week, Max's grey muzzle seemed to be the only reminder of his age. His eyes were bright again, his step confident. The way he carried himself changed, head held high, tail wagging freely, body moving with the fluid grace she remembered. The vet explained that the vitamin D deficiency had been affecting his muscles and joints, making everything painful. Now, with proper treatment, his real personality was shining through again. 1 month after their near goodbye, they returned to the park where they used to spend their mornings. Max pulled excitedly on his leash as they approached his favorite trail, nose working overtime to catch up on all the scents he had missed. They took it slow, but he managed the entire loop, even playing with a young retriever they met along the way. The transformation wasn't just physical. There was a joy about him now, an enthusiasm for life that had been missing during his illness. He started bringing her toys again, initiating play sessions that made her laugh until her sides hurt. The old spark of mischief returned too. She caught him counter-surfing one afternoon, something he hadn't attempted in months. Even though she should have been annoyed, she could only laugh, remembering how close she had come to losing these precious moments forever. 6 months after that heart-wrenching morning at the vet's office, you'd never know Max had been so ill. His coat gleamed with health, thick and golden in the summer sun. He had regained his healthy weight, and his energy levels matched those of dogs half his age. The tennis ball had become a permanent fixture in his mouth again, and he never missed a chance to chase the neighborhood squirrels. They celebrated his recovery with a special trip to the beach, his favorite place. As she watched him bound through the waves, playing with other dogs and digging in the sand, tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. These weren't the desperate tears from that day in the vet's office, but tears of gratitude and happiness. Each bark, each splash, each moment of pure dog joy was a gift she had almost lost.